Hello, welcome to the next session of the NCAR seminar series. Today we have Graham Oakley, a student with Mississippi State, to talk about rice. Go right ahead. And this is recorded and will be available on the website.
Thank you for that introduction. So as Amanda said, my name is Graham Oakley. I'm with the Water Resource Research Institute on main campus over here in Starkville. I'm a project manager with this group, but I'm also working on my PhD. And this is the project that I'm working on called Life After the Flood, an automated low water use rice production system. And just real quick, this picture brings me a lot of joy. It's a very open, wide open area. It's warm in this picture, I can tell you, and the sky is blue. And so that's just something that I really enjoy doing. I love this work because I get to be outside doing stuff like this, messing with water. So if anybody has a history of rice production in Mississippi, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna give a little bit on this slide. So in the Mid-South, rice is traditionally grown in a drill seed delayed flood system where it's planted and grown upland for 40 to 45 days before the flood is added to it, at which time levees are pulled across the field. They're just earthen berms that are used to hold water back, and the water in these fields is maintained at roughly 4 to 10 centimeters deep across the field. So this is done 40 to 45 days after planting until 2 weeks prior to harvest. So as you can tell, this requires quite a bit of water to maintain rice in a traditional system. So y'all work with NCAR, and you know what the aquifer is. It is the primary source for crop irrigation in the Mid-South. However, due to the number of wells and the acres that it irrigates, it is declining faster than it can be refilled. In Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, and Mississippi, there are approximately 607,000 hectares of rice that are produced. Rice accounts for roughly 19% of the acreage of crops in this area, but uses roughly 50% of the water that is withdrawn from the aquifer. So the aquifer is being overused. So just a quick, how is water delivered to rice fields? The first method is through cascade, where you have a well at the top part of the field, so the highest elevation. It's pumped onto the paddy. It flows over the gates into the next paddy and so forth and so on until it reaches the bottom. So this is a pretty inefficient method. It's fairly easy in terms of labor, but in terms of water usage, it's pretty inefficient because it does take time for water to get from the top to the bottom. And then when water does reach the bottom, you turn the water off and it still is cascading down and tends to overuse water quite a bit. Around 1990, there was a method developed around Stuttgart, Arkansas called MIRI, which is the multiple inlet rice irrigation. And that's where you have the same field, but instead of just allowing it to flow from each paddy, you stretch a line of polypipe down it, and it floods all of the paddies at the same time, thereby increasing the water usage and reducing the amount that you use. So it's much more efficient in terms of getting water on the field and reducing the waste. So that's how you get water on the field, but what about managing it on the field once it's there? What our project is looking at is something called alternate wetting and drying. And this is a irrigation technique where the flood is allowed to subside between each irrigation down to where you can see it in this picture where there is no water standing on the soil surface. So it's just a slight tacky surface. And you can see here on the left, Mississippi State has found that you can allow the water to safely subside to 10 or more centimeters below the soil surface without affecting rice grain yield. So this system was developed in the 1980s by Sandhu et al., who found that the intermittent submergence of rice had no adverse effect on grain yield and can reduce the amount of water up to 50% compared to continuous submergence. And so as a direct result of that, AWD is now the recommended water management practice across major rice producing areas of the world, such as Bangladesh, the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, Nepal, and India. One benefit to alternate wetting and drying is that it allows for the increased capture of rainfall. Massey et al. Quote that you can capture up to 80% of the rainfall relative to a conventional flood. So I mean, that's pretty good capturing of rainfall. So that's what AWD is, but there's two different ideas about AWD. So you can see here, I've got AWD ideal in the real world. Ideally, you would flood the field up and it would dry out all at the same time. And then you would reflood it and it would dry back out at the same rate, every paddy, the same rate every time. And then if you wanted to, you could flood it up again and allow it to dry out again. But what we know to occur, because everything that says on paper is really what happens in the real world, correct? No, what happens is you flood the paddies up, and maybe the top 2 or 3 paddies, or maybe even the top 4 paddies, are the ones that tend to dry out, and the bottom 3 tend to maintain water submerging the rice, and then they fill up and dry out, and so forth and so on. So the objective of this study is to quantify the effects of integrating automated irrigation, Internet of Things irrigation technologies with AWD water management on rice productivity and seed quality. We're going to investigate whether coupling this technology with AWD can reduce the water use. And we're also going to examine the effects of deep water on rice grain yield. So that is a thought, because most people know, most rice producers inherently know that there is a deep water effect, but it has never been quantified. So we're going to see what the deep water can do to this rice. Our alternate hypothesis is that automating irrigation in alternate wetting and drying rice will maintain or improve the yield and the quality. We can reduce the water usage, and that we will find a deep water effect. So for this project, we've got a randomized complete block design with multiple reps within the block. We're using MIRI on all of these, and we're going to use AWD and conventional flood. Both of our fields are going to be managed by the producer until that 40 to 4, or until the second urea application right around green ring, and then he will turn it over to us, where we will then manage the system. We're going to drill seed these fields, like I said earlier, and then we're going to collect all kind of data on this. So we're collecting yield, water use, paddy depth, milling quality, chalk and arsenic, some grain quality items there on the last two. And then we're going to analyze all this using SAS 9.4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the Internet of Things. Here on the left, you can see this sensor, this ultrasonic water level sensor. It's installed in the paddy, and it communicates with this pump control that's in the middle picture and this valve here on the right. And so all of this is what's termed the Internet of Things, and the definition from the National Institutes of Standard and Technology is the collective network of connected devices and the technology that facilitates communication between these devices and the cloud, as well as between the devices themselves. So what that means is this sensor on the left can communicate with the pump control as well as the valve on the right, and all three of these can talk together without any human intervention. And so without any human intervention, we can autonomously control the water level of a rice field as the season goes along. There's a few benefits, and research articles have been written about this Internet of Things, and one of them is that it holds a worldwide potential for improving economic profitability and environmental sustainability. There's a few limitations that go along with this Internet of Things. So earlier this summer, we had the internet that went down, the CrowdStrike internet that went down, and that did affect some of this. So when the cell service or internet goes down, these devices can't communicate, and you might miss a few waterings. Another thing is it's a steep learning curve on some of this. You've got to have somebody who knows what they're doing to get them installed and to get them all linked up where they're talking. And some farmers might not be willing to do that or might not have time. And then they are technology, they do tend to fail occasionally. And so you've got to have the time to get those fixed and get them repaired and installed. So for this study, what we're going to do, you can see here on the left, I've got a 6 patty field. We're going to install these sensors in the top of the second patty from the second patty from the top. And this is roughly 4.5 to 7 meters from the top of the second patty. And that's because the top patty is often either smaller or misshapen, and it can be hard to manage the water in these systems. So we're going to use this top of the second patty to do that. So once we start the irrigation, we're going to flood the field, and the system will take over and allow the rice to dry down to that 10 centimeter below the soil surface before taking over and refilling the system. Repeat it as needed. Another thing we're doing in this study is we're going to take depths of the patties down the full length of the field at the top and bottom of every patty, just to kind of make sure that we're not drying out too far and that we have the sensor calibrated, and also to quantify the deep water effects. So looking at a little bit of our data in terms of water applied, over the 2 years we've been conducting this study, we have found that there is no difference in the amount of water that we have applied. So unlike Atwill et al., there is no difference, but that is due to 2 or 3 different things. Number one, we're dealing with a very efficient irrigator. He frequently irrigates with 10 to 12 inches less than what the MDEQ recommends for water usage in rice. So if the allotment is 36 inches, he's 24 to 26 inches less water, or 24 to 26 inches of water over his rice field. So he is less. This past summer was a very hot, very dry summer. So the wells just had to run more. So even if we can capture more rain, if rain doesn't fall, it doesn't matter. We have to irrigate that rice when it gets to that certain level. And then another thing is we were on a well, one of our wells was slightly less productive, therefore requiring us to not allow the level to drop quite as far and pump a little bit more water. So that could have affected our water applied just a little bit. So looking at the grain yield here along the bottom of this, you can see that I've got 0.01 to 1. That's the patty position. So this is the very top of the field. This is a quarter of the way down the field, a half, 3/4 of the way, and that's the very bottom of the field. So on a field level, there was no difference between rice grain yield and the conventional flood. So that's what we were hoping. That's similar to what Sandhu et al. And Atwill et al. Found, that there is no difference between AWD and conventional flood. However, we did detect a deep water effect when you get to this lower portion of the field, that the conventional flood was less yielding than that of the AWD. So we did detect the deep water effect over these last 2 years, and can say that deep water does harm rice yield. So moving in from the actual yield into some yield components, we're talking about head rice here. So that's percent of whole grain. So nobody wants to eat broken rice. They want to eat whole grain rice. And we found that there is no difference between the conventional and the AWD rice. So that is what we want. We don't want to be affecting our final rice quality of the grain when it's harvested. And then looking at chalk, another yield component, we found that AWD does decrease chalk. So from the lower 2/3 of the lower quarter of the field to the bottom, the AWD did reduce the amount of chalk in the rice as compared to the conventional, which slightly increased as you got deeper. So just kind of to rehash all of that, there is no difference between AWD and conventional flood in terms of water use. There was no difference between AWD and conventional flood in the top part of the field but we did detect a deep water effect. There was no difference between AWD and conventional flood in terms of the whole grain. And AWD did decrease the chalk content while the conventional flood did increase slightly. So in terms of our hypothesis, we found that automating irrigation in AWD rice, this is the null hypothesis, will decrease rice grain yield. We can reject that as we maintain or increased our rice grain yield and saw no difference or a slight improvement in seed quality. We are failing to reject that we can reduce the amount of water used because it was no different. And then we did detect a deep water effect on this rice grain. So all of that to say that AWD process is not immune from some issues. So this picture on the left, this is a computer board. It is sitting out in the middle of a hot, humid field. They do tend to go down. And when you have them go down and you're trying to irrigate off of this, you've got to get a quick fix. So that could be one potential for this, is that if it goes down, you might miss an irrigation. This picture in the middle, you can see that there's a slight blowout here in this area, which is designed to do what it did. But if this valve here fails, that blows out, it creates a nice hole in the field for the farmer, and that's something that you've got to fix before you can irrigate again, so that it eliminates the mirror, and you've got to get that fixed before irrigation can continue. And then this picture here on the right, that is a heat index of 108.5 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning. So the heat in these fields is just unbearable sometimes and can affect the production of, or the function of some of these equipment, like this system here. When it goes down, it gets too hot and it can go down. That's a big problem. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we automate irrigation, if we conventionally flood irrigation or anything. If you get it to the end and a windstorm comes through and knocks down 1,600 acres of your rice field, doesn't matter what kind of irrigation you did, because that makes a nightmare to harvest. So that's what we experienced this year, and that can always affect yield because you'd never collect everything that's fallen on the ground. So for the future, we're going to continue our experiment on large scale in Mississippi and Arkansas, but we're also going to do an economic analysis on this, because if it's not economically feasible, no farmer is going to adopt this. They're not going to spend money on something that's not going to help ease their management or make them any money. So just to kind of hit it one more time, there is no difference. We found there is no difference between automating AWD and the conventional flood, but we did find that in terms of yield, the AWD and conventional systems were equal. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions online or in the room?
Thank you, Graham.
No problem.
Appreciate it. So no water use, but if I remember correctly, we were seeing some at the beginning of it, correct?
Last year we did, but like I said, this year we have. Go ahead.
Well, I was just, do you think it's because, I mean, one of the biggest advantages, you're not creating new water with AWD, you're just giving opportunity to capture rainfall. And so, or is that what we're seeing?
I think so. You know,
Lack of rainfall, you don't have you're not taking advantage of what it's offering, which is freeboard to be able to capture the rainfall. So without rainfall, you don't see those differences.
Yeah, I think last year, I've got the number somewhere. I think we had 2 or 3 inches of rain over the summer in these fields, and this year I think we had less than an inch in most of these fields. So something I didn't mention, we were 800 last year. We were on 700 acres. This year we were on 800 acres. So I mean, we got a big area, but when rain doesn't fall on it, there's nothing to capture. So like you said, you gotta get the water from somewhere. So I think we kind of offset the rainfall by having to pump more this year.
And he's the farmer comparison, he is doing conventional consistent or constant flood. But correct me if I'm wrong, but he is also doing Miri, right? So he's
He
not
is. He's not doing Cascade, he's doing Miri. But like I said, Austin is a very efficient irrigator. That 36 inches of water allowed by Mississippi, he's well below that. And I mean, numerically, we're still a little bit below him, but statistically, it's no difference.
Hey, Grandma, do you see any difference in weed control between the AWD and conventional?
So I haven't really looked at that, but I could say yes, that I imagine that the weed control in the AWD is probably slightly less because, you know, it's allowing the weeds to not be totally anaerobic, allowing a chance to grow. But
Right.
honestly, I haven't even paid attention to it. I got a degree in weed science, but I'm not even paying attention to it when I'm out there just because I'm looking for snakes and other items that are out there to make my day really bad. But I would imagine that weed control is slightly less, you know, in the AWD system. You got to do a little bit better job on that.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Any questions in the online? Nope. Okay. Well, with that, thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for speaking, Graham. And we'll see you next month. Reminder, this is recorded and will be available on the NCAR website soon. And with that, thanks.
See y'all.
Thanks,
See ya.
Graham.